With the recent announcement of the normalization of relations between Sudan and Israel and Washington's intention to lift Sudan from the state sponsor of terrorism list, Sudan's transition following the ouster of longtime President Omar al-Bashir has taken another turn. Years of conflict, as well as civil and economic strife, had taken a toll on the country. While the Sudanese people, by and large, want real change in a civilian-led democratic government, foreign exploitation of the country at the hands of multiple foreign powers provides Sudan with an uncertain future. Hi, my name is Joey, and this is a Geopolitical Insurgent, and in this episode, we will be looking at the prospects of Sudan. Formerly a British colony for many years, an independent Sudan still faced many challenges, with foreign exploitation not the least of them. The policies and overall colonial legacy of the British Empire ensured a division between the North and South. During its reign, the British provided more resources and exposure to the North, while the South remained poor and isolated. While geography played a role in this as well, as the southern regions are landlocked, the legacy of the divide and rule tactics employed by the British created the conditions that persisted long after the breakup of the British Empire. To make matters more complicated for Sudan, non-Arab minority groups were centered around most of the country's oil reserves in the south, while the country's Arab majority were centered in the political economic heartland in the north. This guaranteed a continued internal competition for power and influence long after independence, amplifying the already prevalent differences between north and south. As this undermined the authority in the capital Khartoum, the country became vulnerable to foreign interference at the hands of local and distant powers alike. While colonialism ended, the borders drawn by colonial powers ensured continued foreign domination and exploitation through divide and rule strategies over many other countries, and natural resource and agricultural rich Sudan is no different. While Sudan appeared to stabilize when Omar al-Bashir first took power in 1989, following decades of various military coups, his strongman rule and heavy-handed tactics to maintain stability and territorial integrity did anything but that. This culminated in armed conflict with southern separatist movements vying for independence in the south, and a bloody crackdown and ethnic cleansing campaign carried out by the government in Khartoum and affiliated militias. This resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths, and for this, al-Bashir was indicted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. This trajectory eventually resulted in the independence of South Sudan in 2011. The economic fortunes of the country got even worse after losing 75% of its oil revenue due to the loss of South Sudan. Economic problems were compounded as al-Bashir's tactics and deals with transnational jihadist groups left him diplomatically isolated and saw Sudan put on the U.S. state sponsor of terrorism list in the earlier years of his rule. The subsequent economic sanctions from this left Sudan economically isolated and was a big reason why Sudan's economy has faltered over the years. Protests against al-Bashir's rule in late 2018 to 2019 following an increase in prices to fix the dismal fiscal situation would see him removed by the military in a coup in April 2019. The military-led transition government took power with elections for a civilian-led government currently scheduled to take place in late 2022. However, the Sudanese people have demanded that a civilian-led government be elected sooner and are still protesting their current government in Khartoum despite al-Bashir's ouster. On the surface, Sudan's geography gives the country immense potential. The Blue Nile and White Nile converges in Khartoum, making the city not only an important transit route, but providing the surrounding areas with extensive fresh water supplies and fertile land. To put things into context, Sudan controls 45% of all arable land in the Arab world. This alone is nothing to scoff at and gives Khartoum significant geopolitical and economic leverage in the periphery. This is especially true when one considers that future population growth in the surrounding region will increase the demand for agriculture, and an expected boom for Sudan's agricultural sector, which represents 80% and 40% of the workplace and GDP respectively. Furthermore, its location by the Red Sea provides access to global markets. While Sudan lost 75% of its energy resources with the independence of South Sudan, the latter is landlocked, and thus the ability to export oil to global markets is hampered. This makes Juba reliant on Khartoum for its oil exports, with the latter extracting a share of the revenues. While this can be seen as a beneficial arrangement, it's an uneasy one at best, and as such, always subject to disputes that can escalate at any time. Because of this, South Sudan has explored possibilities of exporting oil and creating an economic corridor to the Indian Ocean via Kenya. Sudan remains exposed to spillover effects from conflicts and instability in the surrounding region, which was compounded following the US and NATO-led regime change war in Libya in 2011 that saw the overthrow and death of Muammar Gaddafi. The aftermath gave fertile ground to transnational jihadist groups and human smugglers, with Libya's position on the Mediterranean used as part of human trafficking routes originating in sub-Saharan Africa. In the years following 2011, terrorist groups such as Daesh/ISIS gained a greater foothold in the region and operated cross-border networks, providing a security dilemma for governments in the region, including in Khartoum. Sudan's location, geography, and economic resources combined with a history of instability stemming from colonial rule make it a geopolitical playground for regional and foreign powers alike. Since economic sanctions limited the country's options and overall economic potential, Khartoum was forced to give greater access and concessions to foreign landowners willing to invest in Sudan. Land was sold at fire sale prices, and corporations were allowed to operate with impunity. As the production and export of cash crops was prioritized by foreign entities, Sudan eventually became a food importer despite its abundance of agricultural land. When combined with mismanagement and corruption by al-Bashir's government, Sudan's economic situation was poor and food insecurity was a major problem. A large segment of foreign land expropriation come from firms originating in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Turkey. The concessions made to foreign firms included political concessions to the governments of these countries, such as sending Sudanese troops and mercenaries to fight on behalf of the Saudi and Emirati-led coalition in Yemen, or leasing the Red Sea island of Suakin to Turkey and Qatar. The regional tensions in recent years between the Turkey-Qatar axis and Saudi and UAE-led bloc provided a tough balancing act for Khartoum, which hastened the fall of al-Bashir. Abu Dhabi and Riyadh were unhappy that Khartoum failed to take their side on its blockade on Qatar in 2017 and did not deliver on its promises to root out Islamist officials in the government. As such, Abu Dhabi cut off its financial aid, placing even greater pressure on al-Bashir. The state apparatus who ousted him had contacts with Abu Dhabi and Riyadh before and after the coup, with the two countries approving $3 billion in aid to the transitional government. Abu Dhabi and Riyadh were clearly unhappy that al-Bashir got closer to Ankara and Doha, and there's no reason to think that the tug-of-war between the two sides will end in Sudan anytime soon. Sudan is still assisting with the war effort in Yemen and has shown no indication of forcing Turkey or Qatar out of Suakin. One regional dispute that Sudan is heavily involved in is over the water flow of the Nile River with Egypt and Ethiopia. Ethiopia's control over the river basin of the Blue Nile and operation of the newly constructed Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam has the potential to decrease water flows to downstream Sudan and Egypt. The latter is more concerned over this as 95% of the Egyptian population is concentrated on the banks of the Nile, and water shortages for a growing population will create a humanitarian disaster. Even many conservative estimates place the amount of Egyptians who will face famine in the low millions, not a number to scoff at. The Nile River dispute is therefore a life or death issue for Cairo. As such, having a friendlier government in Khartoum certainly strengthens Cairo's diplomatic leverage in negotiations with Addis Ababa. With al-Bashir gone, who is closer to Addis Ababa's position rather than Cairo's, closer attention needs to be put on the Nile River negotiations between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, especially as foreign countries seek to use this issue for its own geopolitical agendas. Lastly, Sudan recently announced that it would become the third Arab country in the past few months to normalize relations with Israel. While this can be seen as a transaction with Washington to remove itself from the state sponsors of terrorism list, thus giving it more options for investment, this also follows a pattern noted by Turkish authors of the UAE building a concrete access against Turkey and Qatar following its own normalization deal with Israel. Many in Sudan protested the normalization, and it remains to be seen how this affects the political situation in the country moving forward. In the meantime, the uncertainty and the entrenchment of ruling officials with links to foreign powers mean that Sudan will remain in the crosshairs of local and distant powers alike. While the increasing demand of agriculture from countries with growing populations provide opportunities for Sudan, its political and economic sovereignty already has shaky foundations, especially considering recent agreements for IMF-mediated reforms. Worst case scenario is that a deteriorating political and economic situation can fuel a proxy war with multiple foreign powers supporting different sides. This should not be outside the realm of possibility, considering the stakes perceived by foreign powers in Sudan, as well as observing how the regional divides between the Turkey-Qatar and UAE-Saudi axes have fueled proxy conflicts elsewhere in the region. It is the above reasons, combined with its state of transition, that provide Sudan with tough challenges ahead as it strives for a sovereign and democratic future. This was another report from the Geopolitical Insurgent. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching and see you next time.